Afternoon, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and invite our panel to come on up. This is the Miami afternoon lull. I just want to say, did anybody here get their Cuban coffee yet? You're doing Miami wrong. I mean, we need to redo that. And if you're up for it, and if you pretend that I've hyper caffeinated everybody, I promise you. And one of my buddies is at the back here. He knows that this is true. There's a great cafecito place next door, My Treat. Anybody who missed out on this session is going to get cafecito. And as we say in Miami, just like our panel does, if you drink a Cuban coffee, you'll see 30 years into the future. So it's exactly what each and every one of these founders is doing. And good afternoon. Once again, we're at CoMotion. And this panel is one that, if you're in this room today, you're a true believer in technologies and what the frontier can unlock. And several of the panelists are folks that I call friends and people I've gotten to see along the journey. And this panel is called Innovating Against the Odds, Founders in the Future of Mobility. I'll give one quick narrative statement. There's a famous tweet that said something like, they promised us flying cars, and all we got was 280 characters. Which was essentially saying that all this promise of technology and the Jetsons had fallen short. Whoever tweeted that out, however, did not meet Dr. Sampriti, Tiya, Dave, and Billy, because these are the types of founders that are innovating and building in and around that future of mobility. So we've got a lot to talk about. My last panel, I'll let everybody do an introduction, which is not great. I got 3-minute speeches. So instead, I'm going to do the introductions because I know the panelists today. Tiya and I became fast friends at last night's reception, and she is doing extraordinary work as the co-founder and COO of itselectric, reimagining what electric charging infrastructure can look like around America and around the world. By the way, it is very cool and it looks beautiful. Next up, we have Dr. Sampriti Bhattacharyya, and she is none other than the founder and CEO of Navier, which is a manufacturer of America's greatest EV boat technology, hydrofoil. And sitting next to Sampriti is Billy Thalheimer, who is the co-founder and CEO of REGENT aircraft. They have literally invented a new type of flight, electric sea gliders, and we're going to hear a lot more from Billy in a moment. And then finally, certainly not least, we have David Merrill, who's executive chairman of Elroy Air. By the way, that's a great loop back to flying cars, because if you don't know it, you know, George Jetson's son's name was Elroy. Elroy. Boom, we're in a bunch of nerds. If you didn't do that, you're in the wrong session. So, well, welcome, friends. And I'm just going to go ahead and jump in because we've got a lot to talk about. And the first question is actually an open-ended question. And I'm going to start with Sampriti. Each and every one of you is building transformative technologies in different terrains, land, air, and sea. And I want to know, what is the specific problem you're solving? And for those of you who don't know, Sampriti's bio, just like the other folks here, is so extraordinarily impressive. Why did you feel, she's a PhD from MIT, a roboticist, former aerospace engineer, why do you feel now was the moment to tackle the work that you're doing with Navier?
Yeah, so I got into maritime during my PhD, right, at MIT. I was building underwater drones, and you know, everyone was doing you know, space and you know, eVTOL to autonomous car. I think what I saw is that the same technology stacks, like sensors, cheaper, faster computing, scalable manufacturing, that's really transforming the other kind of transportation. If you apply that to maritime, which is a $1 trillion industry, but super fragmented, super old school, really behind in innovation, you can make big step function change. And what I mean, just not incremental progress, right? You suddenly can build vessels that are not just a little bit better, but can be like, you know, 10x better. And what I mean by that, it unlocks a possibility of moving things and goods and people on the water at the cost convenience of land-borne option. And what does that imply is that it just suddenly opens up the waterways as a new kind of highway. Now think about it, like, you know, 40% of the US population lives in the major coastal cities. I mean, you're in Miami, you're in LA, you're in San Francisco, New York, stuck on traffic, and you have these waterways that are just underutilized. And why don't you have high-speed boats that are like, going across the bay and here in our vessel when you're stuck on the traffic, why don't we have high-speed boat from South Beach to like Brickell and so on? Well, the cost, convenience, and the comfort never made sense. So if you're able to design those vessels because technology, scalability, and all of those, the stacks have lined up, you're unlocking a whole new kind of scalable transportation that just was never possible before, and the impact of this would be as big as airways and trainways, right?
Thank you for sharing that. And by the way, I'll say the most Miami thing. I'm lamenting this weekend with F1 getting from Hard Rock Stadium to parties on Miami Beach. I'm sure my family in Nebraska doesn't know or doesn't care. That sounds like a very Miami first world problem sitting on the causeway. But it is, in fact, a reality for coastal cities around our planet. It's, of course, here in America, but the majority of the world's population actually lives in coastal cities. So that's a perfect segue into another founder who is somebody who has been boldly building and dreaming with an entirely new type of vessel that flies. And so, Billy, why now? I mean, I remember meeting you many years ago, but now you're deeply in it. And what is it about this moment that has got you seized with such a sense of conviction with what you're doing with REGENT?
The simple reason for why now is because we can only do it now. Like, these technologies have not existed before that would let us build this system. So for those of you not familiar with REGENT, REGENT is the first manufacturer of sea gliders. Sea gliders are all electric, hydrofoiling, flying boats. So we start at the dock floating on your hull, then we hydrofoil through the harbors, then we take off on our wings to fly on regional routes up to about 180 miles an hour. So there's a lot of new technologies involved in that vehicle. There's battery technologies to be clean and quiet and green and affordable. There's flight technologies. There's advanced software control technologies. These are sort of new things to control, and we need to make them very safe and sort of take the operators out of the loop so the vehicle flies itself safely. So across the board, from how you build the vessel to how you control the vessel to how you power the vessel, I would say these advances in technology that enable not just sea gliders, but a lot of the technologies up here have really only come to bear and been commercializable over the past 5 years or so, which is why we've really matched the technology availability and maturity with this incredible wave of new mobility technologies. I think the need for mobility has existed since the dawn of time. We were promised flying cars because when we were promised them, traffic was still a problem. If you look back at how long, so I grew up in the Boston area, so I'm looking at a route like Boston to New York, for example, but you could even look at a route like LA to San Francisco. You could look at a route like Miami to West Palm. If you look back at, say, the 1950s, everything about the world has changed since the 1950s. We have the internet, we have better medicine and telecommunications, we have AI, all these amazing things, except for transportation, which is sort of the one area where you look back nearly a century ago and it's probably only gotten worse. There's more traffic. It's harder to go through the airports. The railways, which were once new, are now underutilized. So that's why I think we're all up here. We've had this great sort of intersection between mobility, which has really only gone downhill over the past many decades, and technology, which has finally caught us and enabled us all to do something about it.
Something really funny that Billy did, if you follow him on X, he's got a great Twitter account, and he actually shared with all of us, which we can appreciate, the irony of driving down this morning from West Palm Beach to Miami to an advanced mobility conference, CoMotion, as the founder of one of America's most groundbreaking advanced mobility companies, REGENT. I think we can all appreciate the irony of that. You've made that trek
It's a bear of a trip. I got family in West Palm, and it's like, how can you predict how long that trip is going to last? You never know.
He's doing right by his family, and he's trying to trek down, and that's a perfect segue to Tiya, who I know that with the challenges and the problems and opportunity sets that you're moving through with itselectric, why now? Why was this the moment for you and your team to move forward in building a company like itselectric?
Yeah, there's kind of two answers to that. So you and I were chatting last night, and itselectric was born during the pandemic. It was born in Brooklyn, and at the time, I'm a New Yorker, so I take bikes and I take subways everywhere. I don't have a car. And then what happened was there was a pandemic, and public transportation was shut down. Flights were grounded, trains were shuttered, and I had family who worked in hospitals in upstate New York. I had a very old parent who was very far away, and I had to find a way to be able to reach them because there was a refrigerated morgue truck two blocks down from where I lived in Brooklyn. So my partner and I said, we have to get a car. Let's get a car. We're environmentally minded. Let's get a used EV. And in Brooklyn in 2020, there is no place to charge it. And it's really not that much better now. I charge on the chargers that I designed, built, and installed because that went faster than waiting for the infrastructure to come from the city. So why now? It's because everyone's supposed to be moving towards electric, but the two leading barriers for electrification in this country, or the adoption of it, is the cost of electric vehicles, which I'll put a pin in and come back to that in a second, and the second is the access to affordable and convenient charging. So we're taking care of door 2, and I am fully eating my popcorn and here for door 1 because right now we have used Teslas that are on the market for $10,000, and now we're having the equivalent of like a space race now with Jeff Bezos coming out with a sub 20K EV, and this is a very exciting time. I think that the same way that there was a space race that happened in our transportation history before, what we're seeing now is, I think, an industrialist race. Like, I'm all for who's gonna be the billionaire to own this space, because if that's going to be the game that's going to be played, I think that is going to be what gets us to this mass adoption. It's going to wake up the larger OEMs that are still kind of trying to put out the $60,000, the $70,000 EVs, because they're going to see all of these new smaller, lightweight vehicles coming online faster and more affordable and easier to maintain.
They say necessity is the mother of invention, and you have affirmed that with what you're doing with itselectric. And Dave, tell us about why now Elroy Air. What was this compelling driving moment for you and your team to jump in and create what it is that you're now building with Elroy Air?
Sure. So a little background. So we're building big delivery drones, and it's an aircraft that is a vertical takeoff and landing autonomous system that's hybrid electric, and that's built to carry cargo from one point to another, 300-mile range. Why now? I'll tell a little story. So I was actually at an Uber Elevate conference in the first 6 months of building this business. We'd been thinking about building a system to carry people, and there was this one guy from the Army who was up on stage giving a talk about trying to steer people's attention toward this logistics problem that he had in the Army, where they needed to get goods from one place to another. They didn't want the risk of sending a Black Hawk helicopter because it gets shot down and it's a very expensive vehicle. And he was posing this question, hey, a lot of you are working on these transformative electric aircraft. Could we steer you toward logistics and cargo? And that just was a light bulb moment for my co-founder and myself. And we spent the rest of the afternoon talking to him, and then very soon after had discussions with FedEx and discussions with people at the World Food Program, and heard this similar refrain from everybody. Heard that the military needs cargo drones to do logistics in the battlefield. Humanitarian shippers need delivery drones to carry goods to places that are hard and expensive and risky to reach with old legacy helicopters. And shippers, like FedEx, need a way to get goods from warehouse to warehouse. And so that chorus of need that we heard from these 3 different parts of the market, which became the verticals that we now have partnerships within, convinced us there's no time to lose. The technology, as the rest of the panel mentioned, technology is here, and somebody was going to do it, and why not us? So that's when we started charging toward this goal of bringing same-day and next-day shipping to every person on the planet.
I like to give shout-outs when I do these panels. For any of our folks that are doing defense tech and dual use, I want to acknowledge we've got 2 folks here, Solomon and David from Move America, and they are a not-for-profit prime that's specifically focused on building up America's defense industrial base. So if you're building, tinkering, thinking, imagining about defense tech dual use, and we're going to touch upon that. I know a little bit more about how Preeti and Billy are approaching it. Around defense tech dual use, but obviously there's a lot of use cases for these frontier technologies that many of the folks in the room are building, and particularly in supporting the mission of the warfighter. So Okay, I'm going to jump right to you, Sampriti, because you're reimagining maritime mobility. I mean, if you have not seen, I wish in these conferences a way to get like quick video montages of what everybody's doing, but don't pull your attention away from the panel. But if you happen to be on the gram, check out what they're doing on the Navier boat Instagram handle, and you're going to see some very, very cool stuff, as you will with everything else It's Electric and REGENT and Elroy Air is doing. But you're reimagining maritime mobility. But somewhere between the almost impossible engineering problems you're having to solve, the regulatory nuts to also crack when introducing something new to such an old industry. Talk to us about what those challenges have been like and how you and your team have unearthed some of these decades, if not century-old regulatory regimes that need to be addressed in order for us to support American dynamism and innovation. What has that been like for you and your team at Navier?
Yeah, I think Billy and I were just, we three were actually just talking about it over lunch. First thing is that, when we started with, building the N30, we knew like there are regulations. I mean, yes, the big picture is scalable, high-speed water transit in the cities, right, on the water. And but we knew that there are regulations that to go through. But the fastest way to get on the water is to build a six passenger. So if you have a 6 passenger or less, you don't need any Coast Guard certification. So we deliberately actually chose, like, for our first deployments, like water taxis for at least US, to create 6 passengers and less. Now, that was, one of the loopholes that you can, loopholes in the sense, like, get it easily deployed, don't have to wait through all these regulations. But that was not enough, right? So one of the bigger hurdles, that which we are still working on, so we have a contract shipyard in the US, in Maine, and we have our factory in Turkey, in Thalheimer. Now, why is that? Yes, all our integration, all our technology takes place in the Bay Area, in our big hangar, but our hulls are carbon fiber. And when we tried to spin out the factory, it turns out that there are just not enough skilled labor in carbon fiber. There's no way to ramp up a factory, even to build like 20 to 40 boats a year. Like, no contract shipyard would do it, and it's just not feasible. There's not enough skill set, like skilled labor. So out of compulsion, like, our way was to look at foreign places where we can build this, so we ended up choosing Turkey. Now, talking about regulations, there is a regulation called Jones Act, which does not allow you, if you have a foreign-built hull, you cannot operate that commercially. It doesn't matter if it is a 2-passenger water taxi, it doesn't matter what it is. If you're paid for it, it is in Lake Tahoe, it's in the Bay Area, it doesn't matter, you cannot operate it commercially, which is a huge reason why U.S. Maritime is so behind, because those who don't know, U.S. Maritime ranks number 11. I mean, we don't produce much boats at all. Like, China produces like thousands, and we probably have like 200 ocean-going vessels, right? And that's what some of us are trying to change. So we shoot ourselves on the foot, because we are like, okay, now, just because of this, this was a protectionist act that is like, oh, let's manufacture in the U.S., but we cannot manufacture in the U.S. As a result of which, we are not progressing. On the other hand, since other countries are ahead, right, in maritime, they can, like, let's say a company in Europe, right, they might be funded by China. Now they can come to the U.S., build a shipyard here because they're ahead, and put money in here, right? And basically that undermines the whole essence of Jones Act. So these are some of the things that we are trying to figure out. That how do we get a waiver, for example, in this kind of regulations? But we have some work ahead of us to do. So, but we are still focusing on some of the vessels that must be built in the U.S. We are still building them with contract shipyards.
Thank you for sharing that. And Billy, in a similar regard, with your team at REGENT, you're operating at the intersection of maritime and aviation. I'll never forget one of the first times when I met Billy. He said, "Saif, I'm a boat guy." And then when he had to explain what he was building, it kind of like broke my imagination. And I think as you present that within the complexities of a policy environment, how do you thread the needle between these two very different regulatory frameworks while staying innovative and agile?
Yeah, well, I think fortunately there is precedent for our kind of vessel, our craft, being fully owned in the maritime domain. So sort of the best part, like you look at a sea glider and it's this flying boat, and you see aspects of boats and aspects of aircraft on it. But the great part is we really actually don't need to bridge the gap. We don't need a foot in either door on the regulatory side. Wing and ground craft, that's the kind of vessel we are. It's something that stays over the water, only does dock-to-dock over water routes, and never flies higher than a wingspan over the surface of the water. So sea gliders fly very low, sort of like a bird flying on this cushion of air over the water, and that gives us aerodynamic efficiency and therefore range augmentation, and that's why we can fly so far on batteries alone. Turns out we're not the first ones to think of that kind of craft, that wing in ground craft, or WIG, WIG. All the cool stuff for every flying machine ever was pretty much conceived and tried in the 1950s and 60s. So you look back, and sure enough, there were several attempts at this wing and ground craft. So much so that regulatory bodies around the world said, well, how do we regulate these if they were ever to commercialize? And they looked more at their sort of operational environment, because the regulators are as much to keep people on the craft safe as they are to keep sort of the operational environment safe. And so wing and ground crafts stay over water. They don't enter airspace. They don't go into airports. And sea gliders are even captained just like you drive a boat, left and right, fast and slow. And so for all of those reasons, there is actually lots of precedent, just not many people had seen them or realized they existed, but people wrote them that put the certification and the regulatory jurisdiction firmly in the maritime domain. So in the US, you can look in the laws, wing and ground vessels are defined. Internationally, there's agreements between the international regulatory bodies on both the maritime and aviation side that put sea gliders in the maritime domain. And I think sort of the insight we saw early was finding, there's so many laws and there's so many regulations, but finding the ones that sort of give you an edge or an alternate path to market is really important. So early on when we were founding the company, we said, hey, we're really excited about electrification. We can apply it to flying machines. We can enable long range and high speed and low costs and all these great things. And then we started to get into how are they regulated, and that was sort of the thing that put us over the line of like, hey, let's quit our jobs and go start a company to build these things. But from the get-go, you know, I said it then, I'll say it again today, I'm a boat guy.
And what you're doing is clearly bringing to the market an innovation that is making a massive, massive difference. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about some of the defense tech and dual use applications of your technologies. And Tiya, in the work that you're doing, EV charging in dense cities where infrastructure is lacking is a real problem. I mean, you're digging in on that with your company, itselectric. What have you and your team learned about innovating within urban systems and community ecosystems? Because you come from one of the greatest places in America, Brooklyn. I say that as a Miamian, but if you're Miamian, it means you've all got New York family and friends. So you gotta give love. And we know there was a time we were referred to as the other borough. I think it's the other way around now. I'm just saying, but. You know, how do you manage to innovate within those urban systems and community ecosystems, given the challenges for charging infrastructure?
Sure. So if Billy is a boat guy, I am a curb gal. And so
I love that.
Thank you. So
I'm going to introduce you as that anytime we're out and about. I'm like, this is my friend Tiya.
She's a curb
She's
gal.
a curb gal.
Exactly. No, but seriously, I love cities. My favorite thing to do whenever I have 10 extra minutes in a city is just to walk, just go somewhere and just no map, just no destination, just walk and just kind of feel what that city is like. And so we really work very carefully to try and build infrastructure that feels natural to that city. We just cut the ribbon in San Francisco last week, and the biggest compliment that I was paid.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's a big deal. Let's give it up for that. We need everyone in our space to win. It doesn't matter what piece of the ecosystem they're in. That's a big deal. San Francisco is a challenging nut to crack. Anyway, continue.
It is a nut to crack. But the biggest compliment was that people were coming to this ribbon cutting and they were looking around. They said, "Where's the chargers? We don't see them." And so I had this great Barnum and Bailey moment where I was just like, behind you, sir, and like, it was just like right there, because they're just very small. They're very they're designed to really blend into the city like a fire hydrant, and that's what I imagine for the future. So, to answer your question, like, what's the difference between what we imagined we would do and what we are doing in regards to the regulatory environment is that we started and we thought we were a hardware company, but we're actually like a policy and like convener of different opinions company. So what we do is we bring together the city and the utility and anyone else that needs to be part of that conversation to understand how are we going to permit this piece of hardware that sits on public right of way. Because in most cities, not too many things have permits for what goes on right of way. So you can put like a bike rack on the sidewalk. You could put a tree pit on the sidewalk, and those are things that have processes for them. But to put something that is effectively an appliance on the sidewalk, it doesn't exist. So you really need to find new ways of working with cities to be able to do so. So for us, like, all of our work is really in getting all these conversations and these agreements in place and everyone understanding what it is exactly we're doing. And the hardware is just like this cherry on top at the end. It's like it goes pop, and it goes pops in at the end. So for us, so much of our work was really trying to understand, because everyone said you can't do that because of X, you can't do that because of Y. And then we had to spend all this time going down blue books, going down old rules, trying to understand why they thought we could not put this hardware on public right-of-way, why we couldn't connect. Our chargers are a behind-the-meter connection for everyone who wants to check us out. itselectric.us. You can see our charger. It's small. It's, as the kids say, she cute. And it sits on the sidewalk, and it's not powered by a direct utility connection. Instead, if I put one in front of the building over there on that public roadway on the commercial corridor there, it would be powered from the spare capacity in the building next to it. So we're going behind the meter, we're pulling spare capacity, we're running a little tiny conduit below the sidewalk, and that powers that public charger, and then we revenue share back to the building. So there's 8 million reasons why we were told this wasn't going to work, and we had to basically combat every single one, and we have literally like a diligence document that says, oh, this is your reason why you think it won't work in your city, this is what we're going to do. And then once upon a time, in a land called the Biden administration, we had a really nice grant to help build a white paper that would show every other city how we solve this in Detroit, how we solve this in San Francisco, how we solve this in Yonkers. And because every city is a very special animal, and no city's regulations are the same as the others, and no utility's relationship, whether it's a private utility or a public utility, is the same. So we are still building this document that's then going to be a white paper that's going to be available for everyone to say, okay, well, how did Detroit do this? How is New York going to do this? And I think that's the key, is that if we're building the infrastructure of the future, we can't build it on the rules that were basically written, like we just helped revise the New York City Charter that was written in 1925. So these are the types of things that you have to start to think about when you're trying to build what you think is a very simple hardware company, but it's actually a really complex regulatory problem that you're solving.
I appreciate so much the way you've described it, Tiya, aka the curb gal. I was about to give it a little bit of a Caribbean inflection and say curb gal, but I don't know, any West Indians in here? Doesn't look like one. Thank you. You got that, right? Okay, thank you. But what I appreciated so much about the way you framed it, and I think about all my friends who are in the advanced mobility space, and also shout out to their teams, how they really approach the ecosystem building. I think about somebody like my good friend Adam Triolo, who's part of the team at REGENT, who's out there and he really focuses on building these ecosystem level initiatives. And I think about how Navier approaches it and saying, we want to build community partners, even new friends of mine, like my friend Elon at Go Strut, how they think about that, or Glideways and how they're thinking about autonomous transit systems. There's a common ethos for a lot of the people who are in here, not just the technologists, but also people and their willingness to work with our public sector officials. There's a mindset around reimagining. The greatest invention of human civilization is the city. And there's something about the city that it needs an upgrade. And I think what's phenomenal about the technologists and founders who are here is that you all are willing to actually power that upgrade. It's not just about your proprietary technology, it's about reimagining the livability within those cities. And Dave, I want to jump to you because what you're doing, that problem set you're solving around pioneering autonomous aerial logistics, what are your bottlenecks? Is it technology? Is it policy? Is it public perception? Is it the physics? I mean, it's got to be, you're threading multiple needles all at once. What does that look like for you and your team at Elroy Air?
I think the big one is how do you operate drones in the airspace? That's been something that we've been working on in this country for at least a decade. I was part of the drone industry 10 years ago when small camera drones were becoming popular, and we didn't know what to do with them yet. And eventually that led to regulation called Part 107, which allows people to operate small drones in limited ways, but for certain use cases like inspecting infrastructure and wedding photography and real estate photography. So that's like a starting point, but that process, everybody who was a part of the industry saw it move too slow and saw that it kind of disadvantaged the United States and the industry here versus other places that kind of figured it out quicker, or at least got to some solution that allowed people to operate commercially quicker. So today, we're a lot further along, and in the domain of delivery drones, I think we're right on the cusp of changes with policy that are going to allow for some scaling. And the leaders in delivery drones right now that are out there deployed already are smaller systems. And so if you're familiar with companies like Wing or Zipline, they've gotten out there and they're starting to do deployments that are about to scale massively. And some other players that I know of that haven't even announced themselves yet, they're going to be out there in big scale very soon. So I think the field of delivery drones is about to grow. And our systems are bigger. They're just heavier and larger aircraft than the small last mile single parcel delivery drones. So we're going to be in some ways drafting off of that momentum of the smaller systems, but there will need to be some bigger, some regulations that get finalized or waivers that allow us to operate with bigger systems. So I'd say, of all the things, technology, we've been flying our system, full-scale aircraft for 18 months, developing the technology for years before that. There aren't any hurdles that we can't overcome from a technology point of view. And it's really about finalizing that set of policies that allow scale in the airspace. And that's also partly why we decided early we have to build a robust business with military also, because the military doesn't have the same constraints about how they use the airspace as civil delivery drone makers do. And I think there's a number of companies like us that have chosen to focus early days on military business because it gets them around certain hurdles in the civil airspace or just civilian markets that aren't present with military.
I so appreciate you giving that walkthrough, particularly around the way you view the work at Elroy being linked in with other builders that are maybe in the passenger space. I think that there's something about, and I think John Rossant and the entire team of CoMotion does a great job about this, is that we're a small but mighty movement. Everybody who's here, whether it's our policymakers who are dreaming in a big way. I'm a Miami guy, so I think about somebody like Commissioner Eileen Higgins, or of course, Madam Mayor Daniela Levin-Cava, our public policymakers, or also everyone here. You're part of a movement, and sometimes that moonshot thinking, I know, and Sampriti, you embody that, as do so many of our founders who are here. How do you balance that moonshot thinking that sort of compels you to build the technology that you have with the constraints and realities of market adoptions, timelines, and funding pressure? How do you balance that? Because the technology that you and your team have built at Navier is groundbreaking, but then there's just like a market reality around adoption and timelines and customers. How do you compartmentalize and just sort of execute on that? Because I know you managed to make it look really, really easy, but I know it's really challenging.
Yes, I think I'm like a bit conservative in that sense, right? I actually looked at the reality. When we started this company, it was amidst COVID. And of course, the goal is like scalable transportation on the water, but everybody was like, people are not going to go to work anymore. Everybody's going to do work from home. So the transportation like pitch would not have sat really well during that time. But I often say, I love this quote by Jeff Bezos. It says, be rigid on the vision, but be flexible on the details. So my end goal is right, to build a next generation maritime company with like the most compelling marine vessels and platforms, right? And the question is, how do we get the technology out in the market effectively, efficiently, and fast? So the first step was like, okay, build a vessel, but do it for recreational boat buyers, And that was the right step to do. Like, we showcased the technology at boat shows. We got the first reaction of the market, and right now we are in the, in 2022, we were still, just have completed our first initial fundraise, seed raise, and just started working on a prototype. In 10 months, we got to a full scale, and in 2.5 years, we delivered our first production vessel. And we are now, about to finish delivery of the first 10 by end of May. And these are customer funded. Like we took money and we sold, almost $1 million boats. But that gave us a huge confidence level in building something real, right? I mean, I think we are getting your product out in the wild and learning. I mean, you can have a big vision, but like hardware is just so hard, and production, people don't appreciate what it is like. Even at a small batch, it's like, I don't know, 1,000x harder than building your first prototype. And I think doing that in a sensible fashion, in a conservative way, was very helpful for us. And I think having that cash in the bank now gives us confidence. Okay, we know our product works. We can now go over the big customers. I mean, many of these are inbound. I mean, all our defense customers have been so far inbound, for example. I think now gives us confidence. It's like, okay, now we will go out for folks that are looking to have fleets, because this is not a dream. This is the technology. It works. It is with the customers, and we actually know how to scale, how to maintain. And that way, one nice part is that we're building a company that's very sustainable at the foundation, that does not necessarily will need to rely on external funding to be sustainable. And then we want to be raising large amount of venture funding and other funding for like the growth. Like when you're doing transportation, scalability, of course you need a huge amount of cash infusion, but you want to we want the robustness from within, that hey, at the core, we have a sustainable business that is useful in defense, that's useful in commercial, and that's useful for recreational users, because at the core of it, we are a platform that has a very compelling proposition, right? It reduces operational costs at speed, all electric, and all of that. So that's what our approach has been, and I think so far has been pretty effective.
Your framing is powerful, and it reminds me when you spend time with Frontier founders, you clearly view innovation as the seed and execution as the forest. And it stands out because that's what you talked about. By the way, it was an applause-worthy framing that Preeti basically said that they started their company as a function of the pandemic, and by May, they're going to have their first 10 delivery of their boats to paying customers, with very, very lean inbound investments and venture investments. Let's give her a round of applause for that, because this is the spirit of what we're talking about at CoMotion. And Billy, you are somebody who's been at it with what you're building with REGENT, and I want to hear any insights, because I think there's some other founders and builders and policymakers that are here. We hear the P word, pivot, and it's something that it sometimes it can be scary, but what have your experiences been like as you've been building REGENT with your team around pivoting on product or strategy or go-to-market in maybe a way that surprised you? And what's something that you've learned, a critical insight from that experience of maybe pivoting an aspect of what you're building and executing upon?
That's a really good question, and I think we've had a somewhat unique take on this. So this may be a somewhat surprising answer. So to those in the room on similar journeys, your mileage may vary with this approach, but we have not pivoted at all whatsoever since the inception of this, despite constant advisory to the contrary. To some extent, going back to the sort of the moonshot thing, the world-changing thing, like if it changes the world, it is because nothing like it exists. And if nothing like it exists, there are billions of people in the world. Lots of them are smart. Someone probably would have thought of a better way to do this besides you. So there is a reason, probably a list of reasons, going back to the list of all the ways they say no, why this world-changing thing does not exist today. So I think that's sort of part of the founder's dilemma, is like, there are going to be not one but many walls, and one way to deal with those walls is to pivot around them and zigzag between them, and you get to a solution. We believe so strongly in our vision that we can connect the coastlines of the world and service that 40% of the world that lives in coastal populations with a transportation technology that is simultaneously faster, greener, and more affordable than what we use today, that our strategy is to run through all of the walls. So I think that has worked well for us. I also think it's difficult. It's difficult when advisors and investors say, this is too great a challenge, do not undertake this. It's difficult when family and friends say, you are spending too many hours on this, or stop traveling so much, come home. But I think that is part of just what you sign up for. When you are doing a world-changing technology, it's something that myself, and I think really fortunate to work with this incredible team at Regent, because we all thrive on that. Like, I can state personally, I imagine this the same of everyone on this panel and their teams, but like, you do not work at a company like this unless you love running through walls. So I think that makes it really exciting. It makes it hard. It's why the hit rate for venture is not high. It's why the hit rate for hardware is even lower. That is just sort of how the portfolio is built. So there's this natural weeding out function so that when you get to your 30th wall, you're in a sort of pretty elite class at that point, because everyone else, I look at this panel with me and like, these guys have run through a lot of walls. I don't know the extent of the number of pivots they've all made, but you sort of, to get to this place, delivering hardware product, influencing cities and public counties, working with governments, delivering hardware, it takes running through a lot of walls to get here.
You answered that exactly the way I hoped you would answer it, which I think is something that's a strong signal to all of us. Founders who are building this space are seized with the sense of conviction. I will also want to share, as somebody who's a parent of teenagers, I have odd cultural observational points. There's a new TikTok trend of teenagers who literally run through walls into people's backyards. It is called the Kool-Aid Man Challenge. So that is a real thing. I'm not describing that. Oh yeah. So that is a real thing, and it was even on the Today Show this morning. So there you go. So I want to open it
We're
up.
hiring, I should
We're hiring. I got a 17-year-old ready to go. You know that. So I want to open it up to our audience for some questions. I know we've had a dynamic exchange with our panel. Let's get some questions, friends. Sir, we've got a microphone coming your way.
Thank you. First of all, great job, everybody. It's really interesting to see, founders of companies and the challenges they go through to get a company off the ground. My question is for Billy. Have you established a price point yet per passenger for your service? And is it going to be available to everybody or just the elite?
We have. So really the whole founding principle was we have this tremendous opportunity to bring costs down. So our nearest competitor are probably short-haul aviation. You can imagine we're targeting routes between 50 and 200-ish miles with existing battery technology. So those are ranges where you're sort of stuck in traffic no matter when you go, but going to the airport, you're literally sitting in the airport longer than you're on the airplane itself. Like, you don't have enough time to open up a laptop before you're coming back down. So we basically wanted to say, dreaming big, transforming how people move, that we can offer the speed of an aircraft at the price and convenience profile of a car. And we have this great technology unlock now in electrification. We can take all the advancement and the billions that have gone into battery technology and apply them to a flying machine or a hydrofoiling boat. So that's sort of the technological premise on which this was based. So then we said, how do we attack the cost? The driving cost of short-haul aviation is maintenance cost. Your engines heat up and cool down, your landing gear sort of hit the runway each time, your fuselage expand and contract. So whenever you're moving hardware does not like to move. That's how you age it. You age by the cycle, you do shorter and shorter routes, you fit more cycles in a day, and your maintenance cost gets even larger. So it turns out that the driving cost of your short-haul routes, inter-island in Hawaii, flying through the Bahamas, is actually your maintenance. It's not the fuel, it's not the the pilots, it's the maintenance costs. And so with batteries, we have very simple systems, very low part count, just some wires and some magnets. We can bring that cost down substantially. So our operating cost is about equal in a 12-passenger, our Viceroy Sea Glider, to what a 150-seat 737 would be, for example. It's about 50 cents per seat mile, or so a 100-mile trip. You'd pay about $50 in the cost for that vehicle. Gets a little more expensive when you fly further, a little less expensive when you fly shorter. But as an example, comparison point, if you look at other small aircraft in that sort of 12 to 19 seat range, they're charging about 40 to 50% higher. So they're closer to 90 cents to $1 a seat mile. So that was really the key, is from the beginning, we are not creating something for the wealthy or the elite. This is going to change the way everyone moves. And then when we build our larger system, the 100-seat vehicle, 100-seat Sea Glider, we're going to have the costs again. But that cost parity, cost, comfort, convenience, that cost is going to be accessible from day one.
Other questions? It's a great question. Thank you, sir. Please.
Thanks. Thank you all very much. This is really interesting. I also have a question for Billy. LA is hosting the Olympics in 2028. The LA Metro chair just announced we better look at a water taxi option. Have you been in touch?
So my head of commercial is sitting right next to you. His name's Adam. We definitely should talk about that. Actually, LA was one of our sort of initial cities that we looked at. I think there's incredible opportunities for waterways. One of the early things we did, so we talked a little bit about ecosystems and multimodal transportation. It's our goal that Sea Gliders would be working with Naviers and drone deliveries and all sharing the same charging infrastructure. So we think about this a lot. How do we fit in with existing multimodal transportation infrastructure? You look at LAX, and it just so happens to be on the coast. And when you look at major airports all around the world, Miami is actually one example where we're 15 minutes away from the coast. But if you look at a lot of other airports, all the airports in New York, in Boston, et cetera, San Francisco, they're all coastal. And a lot of that is because of access, it's because of noise mitigation and safety. But that makes it the perfect place to build these multimodal transportation ecosystems where we can bring charging, we can share it with flying machines and boats and buses and cars and aircraft. So it's something we've looked a lot at. So many people are on the coast. I think Sampriti said earlier about sitting in traffic, driving in California and looking out at the coast, and there's nothing out there. And it's like, why can't we do this? So we're very interested in bringing Sea Gliders to California. I think 2028 would be a great time for it.
So I wanted to ask another question to Tiya. If the audience were to walk away today remembering just one idea or insight from this conversation, what do you hope that is?
Well, these are all really awesome founders that have very different solutions to different problems, but I would say that we're all working towards electrification because it is a superior, evolved form of transportation. And I always think about our model, and I think about it I also have a child, not yet TikTok age, thankfully, but younger. And when we're talking about...
No Kool-Aid Man challenge happening there.
No, not yet.
Fortunately.
No, exactly. But when we describe how the world is currently powered, and I talk to her about it, I say, well, right now, people have to basically excavate coal, and they have to do all this damage. We were driving through Pennsylvania the other day, and we saw, basically a lot of the sort of damage that are happening to the hillsides from the coal removal, and then we burn it, and then this creates, carbon and all these things that happens. And then we talked about sort of the other dynamic of a system that is, basically renewable. We have solar that powers a building that also powers transportation. We talk a lot about how energy is in some ways becoming a currency in this new world that we're moving into. And these batteries are in many ways wallets. And it's a brave new world that we're entering. So the takeaway that I want everyone to have is that regardless of political affiliation, it's not about green or climate. It's about the new and better way to power and to move and to comprehend the energy system in which we live. And I think that's sort of like the North Star that we're all working towards, is what's next, and not what's behind us, but what's forward in front of us.
Tiya, thank you for giving us that final thought. Friends, please join me in giving a warm round of applause for our extraordinary panel CEO conversation. Thank you all. Thank you.